3 weeks after my husband died, his mother produced a will I had never seen. It left their family home, my home, the home Daniel and I built together, to her. It cut me out completely. She'd forged his signature to do it, and she handed it to me at his memorial lunch in front of the entire family and told me I had 30 days to move out. What she didn't know is that I'm a probate paralegal. I draft wills for a living. I had my husband's real will, the one he actually signed, safe with his attorney. And I know exactly what makes a forged one fall apart in your hands. I didn't argue with her in front of everyone. I just opened the file. Welcome back to the Daily Confessions. This is the channel for the people who were always treated like guests in their own family, the one who married in and never got to stop proving it, the one who kept the peace because someone else needed you to stay small. If a family ever made you feel like you were borrowing a seat you'd earned, you're in the right place. The quiet ones keep their receipts. This story is built out of mine. Let me go back to the beginning. I want you to understand exactly who they'd always decided I was. My name is Tessa. I'm 34. I'm a probate paralegal. That means I spend my days inside other people's estates. Wills, trusts, the paperwork of who gets what after someone is gone. I help people write wills that hold. And because I know what makes one hold, I know exactly what makes one come apart in your hands. A will isn't real just because it has a signature on it. There are rules. Who has to be in the room? Who has to watch the pen move? How it has to be witnessed and notarized and dated. I've seen wills thrown out of court over a single broken rule. A wrong date. A witness who wasn't really there. One bad line, and the whole thing turns to paper. Remember that. It matters later. I met Daniel 12 years ago and married him 2 years later. And from the day he first brought me home to meet his mother, I understood the arrangement. There were the Marsh family, and there was me, the girl who married in. Daniel's mother was Vivian. Vivian was elegant. She had a way of looking lovely while she cut you. She never once raised her voice to me. She didn't need to. She did it all in the small things, in a voice like cool water. Let me give you one dinner, because it tells you everything. The first holiday after Daniel and I got engaged, Vivian hosted. She had place cards, lovely handwritten ones, at every seat. There was one for every cousin, every aunt, every child. There was not one for me. When I stood there, not knowing where to sit, she looked at me and said, "Oh, just pull a chair in from the kitchen, dear. We didn't know your situation yet." My situation? I was Daniel's fiancé. I pulled a chair in from the kitchen, and I sat at the corner of the table, half a foot lower than everyone else, on a kitchen chair, for the whole meal. Nobody said a word about it. That was the message. You are here on sufferance. Don't get comfortable. And the photos. Every family gathering ended with photos. Vivian loved a family photo. And somehow, every single time, I was the one who ended up holding the camera. "Tessa, you've got such a steady hand, would you mind?" Year after year. So that when you look through 10 years of Marsh family photographs, I am not in a single one of them. I was always behind the camera, taking the picture of a family I'd married into, and was never quite allowed to join. I want to be honest about my part because it matters. I let her. Every slight I swallowed. Every dinner I smiled. Every photo I held the camera. I told myself it was love, that you don't make a man choose between his wife and his mother. So I made myself small and called it being a good wife. It wasn't entirely. Some of it was just fear, wearing love's coat. I was afraid that if I ever pushed back, she'd finally say out loud what she made me feel every single day. That I wasn't really one of them. Here's the thing she never understood about me, though. I was quiet. I was not stupid. I noticed everything. It's my whole job. I notice the thing that doesn't fit, the date that's wrong, the name that shouldn't be there. I just chose, for 10 years, not to make a sound about any of it. That choice was about to end. Daniel and I built a life. Not a flashy one, a good one. We bought a house on Lark Street, a little two-story with a crooked porch step he kept promising to fix and never did. We painted every room ourselves, badly, laughing about it. We planted a maple in the back the first spring, a skinny little thing, and every year after we measured it against the back fence to see how much it had grown. That house was ours. Not the Marsh house. Ours. We made it from nothing, board by board, paycheck by paycheck. And because we were who we were, a paralegal and a careful man, we did the responsible thing early. We made our wills, real ones. Daniel sat down with his longtime attorney, a steady, gray-haired man named Carl Beck, and made a will that was simple and complete. Everything to me. His wife. The house, the savings, all of it. To Tessa. Signed in front of 2 real witnesses who were really in the room. Notarized. Self-proved, which is the airtight kind. And Carl lodged it in his office for safekeeping. I knew exactly where every page lived. I file these things for a living. 2 years ago, Daniel got sick. It came fast and it came cruel. A stroke first, and then complications, and then more. He spent his last 11 days in the ICU. I was there for every one of them. I need you to sit in those 11 days with me, because they become the center of everything that happened later. Daniel couldn't speak at the end. The stroke took his words and most of his right side. His right hand, his signing hand, the hand he wrote checks and cards and his own name with, didn't work anymore. It lay still on the blanket. I used to hold it anyway. I'd sit by that bed for hours and hold the hand that couldn't hold anything back. On the good days, early on, he could squeeze my fingers a little with his left hand. That was our whole language at the end. One squeeze. I'm here. One squeeze back. So am I. By the last days, even that was gone. A machine breathed for him. I counted the days on a little pad by the window, because the days had stopped meaning anything else. Day 8. Day 9. Day 10. I held that still right hand on every one of them. It did not sign a single thing in those 11 days. It could not. I know, because it was in mine the whole time. Daniel died on a Thursday, day 11. And the woman who showed up to grieve him loudest was the woman who'd spent 10 years pretending I didn't have a name. The funeral was Vivian's masterpiece. She wore black like a queen receiving guests. She stood at the front and accepted the mourners as if she were the only one who'd lost him. People lined up to hold her, to tell her that no mother should have to bury a son. And they were right. She did lose her son. That part of her grief was real, and I won't pretend it wasn't. But she stood up at that church and gave a eulogy about Daniel's whole life that did not have me in it. 12 years together, 10 of them married, and his own wife was a line she forgot to include. I sat in the second row, in my own grief, holding it together with both hands, and I watched his mother be the widow. There's a small moment from that day I need you to hold, because it's the thread that hangs her later. At the reception afterward, Vivian was surrounded, holding court in her grief, and she got onto the subject of who hadn't come. She was wounded about it, and she said, to a whole circle of relatives, with real bitterness in her voice, "And Pearl, my oldest, dearest friend in the world, out in Arizona at her daughter's this entire month, and can't even come home to help me bury my own boy." Pearl, Vivian's oldest friend, in Arizona, the entire month. I heard her say it. So did a dozen relatives. Tuck it away somewhere safe. Vivian put that fact into the world herself, in front of witnesses, with tears in her eyes. She had no idea she'd just handed me the thread that would unravel everything. I thought, in those first raw weeks, that grief would be the heaviest thing I'd ever have to carry. I was wrong about that. Because 3 weeks after we buried Daniel, before I'd even washed the funeral out of my clothes, Vivian decided it was time to take my house. She did it at a memorial lunch. She organized the whole thing herself, and she held it at my house, on Lark Street. She called it a celebration of Daniel's life. She told me she'd handle everything so I could rest, and like a fool, still numb, I let her. Caterers came into my kitchen. Vivian moved my furniture to make room for a buffet. She rearranged my own cabinets to find serving dishes, and she put a cloth I'd never seen over my dining table. She filled my house with the whole family, the aunts, the cousins, Daniel's sister Holly, Daniel's Aunt Brenda. She arranged white flowers on my counters. In my house. In the house she was about to try to take. I drifted through it like a guest at my own husband's memorial, which, I would learn in about an hour, was exactly how she'd already decided to cast me. And then, when the room was full and everyone had a glass in their hand, Vivian tapped a fork against a crystal glass. The room hushed. She stood, and she said she had something to share. Something Daniel would have wanted handled properly, with the family all together. She took out a folder, a few pages inside it, and she told the room in that lovely, level, cool water voice that before he passed, Daniel had made his final wishes known, that he'd made a new will near the end, and that in it, her son had left the family home to his mother. To keep it in the Marsh family, she said, where it belonged. People nodded, soft and sad. She let it land. Then she turned to me, gentle as anything, in front of every face I'd held a camera for. "Tessa, dear," she said, "I know this is hard. Daniel worried about you rattling around alone in a house this size. He wanted you looked after, but he wanted the home to come home, to the family. I think 30 days is more than fair. Take whatever you need, of course. Take whatever you need. From my own house. At my own husband's memorial. In front of his entire family, who were now turning to look at me with soft, terrible pity. Poor Tessa. Of course Daniel left the house to his mother. The Marshes have had that family so long. Tessa only married in. I felt the whole room decided at once. I felt the old instinct rise up in me, fast and familiar. Keep the peace. Don't make a scene at his memorial. Be small. Be good. Pull a chair in from the kitchen and sit half a foot lower than everyone else. And don't make a sound. And then I looked at the folder in Vivian's hand. And the paralegal in me, the part of me that has read 10,000 wills, that knows a will the way a mechanic knows an engine, woke all the way up. Because I knew something nobody else in that bright, pitying room knew. Daniel had a will. A real one. With Carl Beck. Signed 2 years ago when he was healthy. And it left everything to me. So whatever Vivian was holding was one of two things. Either it was a secret will my husband made and hid from me, his wife, and a probate professional, in his final weeks, while he lay in the ICU unable to hold a pen. Or it was a forgery. I knew which one before I read a single word. But I am a professional. So I didn't accuse her. I didn't cry. And, for the first time in 10 years, I didn't keep the peace either. I did the third thing. The thing nobody in that room expected from quiet Tessa. I held out my hand. And I said, very calmly, "May I see it?" Vivian hesitated, just for half a second. But I read that hesitation like a line in a contract. Then she handed it across, because to refuse in front of everyone would have looked strange. And so I stood in my own dining room, with white flowers Vivian had bought on my counters, and his whole family watching, and I read my dead husband's forged will like the paralegal I am. I want to tell you what reading it felt like, because this is the center of it. To everyone else in that room, it was a will. Pages, a signature that looked like Daniel's. Official, heavy, sad. To me, it was a confession. Because I don't read a will the way you do. I read it the way an inspector walks a bridge, not admiring it, looking for the crack that brings the whole thing down. And it was nothing but cracks. I didn't say one word of that out loud. Not there. Not yet. I kept my face as still as Daniel's still hand. I said only, "Thank you, Vivian. This is a lot. I'd like to read it properly before we discuss anything." And then I folded it, and I kept it. I held on to it, and she could not ask for it back without looking, in front of everyone, like a woman afraid of her own document. The room read my calm as surrender. Poor Tessa taking it so well. Let them. I had exactly what I needed. I had the forged page in my hand. I had 11 days in an ICU in my memory, down to the hour. And I had a real will sitting in Carl Beck's office that not one person in that room knew existed. I got through the rest of that lunch. I don't remember much of it. I remember holding the folder against my side like it was warm. I remember Vivian, lighter now, already talking to an aunt about repainting once the house comes back. And I remember standing on my own crooked porch step as they all left, accepting their pity hugs, holding my husband's forged will in my hand, and feeling something I hadn't felt in 10 years around that family. Not fear. The opposite of fear. I felt steady. That night I went back inside, to my own house, that every person at that lunch had just quietly decided wasn't mine, and I did the only thing I have ever truly been good at. I stopped keeping the peace, and I started reading. I cleared the dinner table. I put on a good lamp. I made a pot of coffee I let go cold. And I went through the forged will the way I'd go through any contested will at work. Line by line. Slowly. And I built the list of everything that was wrong with it. First, the date. The forged will was dated the 4th, 9 days before Daniel died. I read that date and I had to put it down and breathe. Because I knew exactly where Daniel was on the 4th, the ICU. Day 8 of 11. Intubated, a machine breathing for him, his right hand dead on the blanket. I had held that hand on the 4th. The will said he sat up and calmly signed 4 pages on the one day I knew, to the hour he couldn't lift a pen. Not unlikely. Impossible. And provable because hospitals keep records, and I had lived in that room. Then the witnesses. 2 names signed as having watched him sign, and the second one stopped my breath. Pearl Hadley, Vivian's oldest friend. The one Vivian had stood up at the funeral, weeping, and told a dozen of us was in Arizona at her daughter's the whole month. Pearl couldn't have witnessed anything. She was 2,000 miles away. And the person who'd put that on the record with her own grieving mouth was Vivian. I actually laughed when I got there, alone at my kitchen table at midnight. She'd listed her best friend as the witness to make it look solid, then complained at the funeral that her best friend had been across the country the whole time. People who lie always do this. They can't hold the whole story in their head at once. One mouth, 2 truths, and they never line up. The notary stamp was wrong too, in the small ways a forged one always is. But I barely needed it. Because of the last thing, the thing that beat all of it. Daniel had a real will. Made with Carl, 2 years before he got sick, when he was healthy and could hold a pen. Properly witnessed, notarized, self-proved, lodged and dated and sitting in a drawer being true. A will like that does not lose to a forgery. Vivian had folded a paper boat and sailed it straight at a stone wall, and she never imagined the quiet girl who held the camera knew exactly where the wall was built. I sat there in the lamplight, in the house she'd told me to leave in 30 days, with cold coffee and my husband's forgery in front of me, and something that had been clamped shut in me for 10 years finally let go. That was the night the roll came off for good. Sitting at that table, I finally saw it plainly. What I'd had with Vivian was never love. It was a decade of making myself small so she'd never have to say out loud that she didn't think I belonged. And now she'd tried to forge my husband's name, to make it permanent, to put me out of the house we built. I was done being small. I wasn't going to keep the peace anymore. I was going to keep the truth. But I was going to do it the right way. Because the most satisfying part of this whole story is that I never once had to raise my voice. I called Carl Beck first thing the next morning, Daniel's attorney, the keeper of the real will. I told him what had happened at the lunch, the fork on the crystal, the folder, the 30 days. There was a long silence on the line. Then Carl, who is a gentle, careful man, said something I won't forget. "Tessa," he said slowly, "I've known that family 30 years, and I always wondered in the back of my mind whether she'd try something the day Daniel wasn't there to stop her. He'd seen it too. For decades. He just had never been able to say it out loud until I called." Carl and I went to work. Carefully and properly, the way you have to. He had Daniel's real will ready to enter into probate, which by itself would have ended the whole thing in an afternoon. But I didn't only want to win. Winning quietly would have let Vivian retreat and tell everyone it was all a misunderstanding between grieving women. I wanted the forgery itself in front of the court, on the record, in the light, so it could never be walked back, and so the entire family, every face that had pitied me at that lunch, would have to see exactly what she'd done. Because a forged will isn't a family squabble. It's a crime. And she'd announced it with a fork against crystal in my own dining room. So we built the file, the way I build any file, calm and complete and quiet. We pulled Daniel's full ICU records for the 4th. Every entry. The intubation note. The line that said he was non-responsive. The note that his right side did not function. A medical chart, hour by hour, showing that on the day Daniel supposedly sat up and signed a 4-page will, he was unconscious with a tube in his throat. You cannot argue with a chart. A chart has no grief and no agenda. It just says what was true at 2 p.m. on the 4th. That's why I trust paper over people. We confirmed Pearl. That was almost too easy, and there was a grim little justice in how easy it was. Pearl Hadley really had been in Arizona at her daughter's the whole month. Her daughter posted photos all month long, the way people do, and there was Pearl in them. At a barbecue, at a birthday, on a porch in the desert sun. Each one dated, each one 2,000 miles from where she had supposedly stood and watched my husband sign. The witness on Vivian's will had a perfect, airtight alibi for not being a witness. And it was Vivian who'd put that alibi on the record, weeping at her own son's funeral. And we ran the notary. The commission on that stamp did not survive a real look. The small details were wrong, in exactly the way forged things are wrong when an amateur copies a format she doesn't understand. One more crack in a document that was made of nothing else. 4 ways the will was a forgery. An impossible date. A phantom witness, a bad notary, and a real will that beat it regardless. Any single one of them would have been enough. Together, they weren't a case. They were a wall. I put it all in one folder, and at the front I wrote a 1-page summary, the way I do at work. Because the truth is most powerful when it fits on a single page and never once raises its voice. While I was quietly building it, Vivian was loudly moving. She thought I'd folded, you understand. She thought quiet Tessa had taken her 30 days and accepted her place, the way quiet Tessa always had. So she got bold. She had a man come by to assess the house for the family and stand in my living room measuring my walls with his eyes. She told the relatives I'd be out soon, and wasn't she being so gracious about it? And she sent Daniel's Aunt Brenda to me. The peacekeeper. Brenda meant well. I do believe that. She sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen Vivian had catered her ambush from, and she took both my hands across the table, And she said the thing families always say. Tessa, honey, Vivian just lost her son. She's not in her right mind. Whatever this trouble is, can't we please keep it inside the family? Don't drag it all through lawyers and courtrooms. For Daniel's sake. Don't make this ugly. For Daniel's sake. They always reach for the name of the one person who can't speak anymore. And for just a moment, the old Tessa stirred in me. The one who keeps the peace. The one who pulls the chair in from the kitchen so nobody has to be uncomfortable. I felt the pull to say, "Of course, Brenda, you're right. Let's keep it quiet." And then I thought about Daniel's still right hand in mine in the ICU on the 4th. The exact day Vivian swore he sat up and signed. And the pull simply died in me. I told Brenda that I loved this family, and that I would love Daniel until the day I died. But that what Vivian had done was not a family disagreement to be smoothed over with a cup of tea. It was a forged will, a crime, committed against her own dead son's wishes, and against me. And I would not help anyone in this family pretend otherwise. Brenda left looking like she didn't quite understand what I meant. She would understand soon. They all would. Then Vivian herself called me. And this is the call that told me she still believed all the way down that she'd won. She was warm, almost tender. She said she knew 30 days felt fast, and she wanted to make it gentle. She'd even let me dig up the little maple tree from the backyard, she said, if I wanted to take it with me. To remember Daniel by. The maple. The skinny tree we planted our first spring and measured against the fence every single year. She was offering, as a kindness, to let me take my own tree out of my own yard before she took the yard. I held the phone, and I looked out my kitchen window at that maple, taller than the fence now. And I said, very pleasantly, "That's generous, Vivian. Let's talk about everything at the will reading, because that's what I'd arranged." I didn't confront her in private, where it would be her polished word against quiet Tessa's. I asked Carl to schedule a formal reading of Daniel's will. The real one. And I made sure the entire family was invited. The very same family that had stood in my dining room and watched her tell me to get out of my house in 30 days. I wanted every one of them in the room. Vivian wanted an audience for her version of things. Wonderful. We would use her audience for the truth. We both wanted the same room full of the same people. Only one of us knew what was actually going to be read in it. The reading was at Carl's office. A long conference table, a wall of law books, the family filing in one by one. Vivian arrived like a woman coming to collect what was already hers. She took the seat at the head of the table without being offered it. Holly was there, pale and unsure. Brenda. The aunts and the cousins who'd given me their soft pity at the lunch. And me. Quiet Tessa. With a plain folder in front of me and my hands folded on top of it. Vivian even smiled at me across the table. A small, gracious, victorious smile. The smile of a woman about to be handed a house in front of an audience. Carl began. He said he was the attorney who had handled Daniel Marsh's estate planning for many years. And he said he was going to read the last will and testament of Daniel Marsh that was on file with his office. Executed, witnessed, notarized, and self-proved. 2 full years before Daniel's illness. I watched Vivian's face as that last part landed. 2 years before his illness. Her brow moved, just slightly. That was not her will. Her will was dated the 4th, 9 days before he died. Carl read it. It was short and plain, and it was Daniel all over. He left everything. The house on Lark Street, the savings, all of it, to his wife. To me, by name. And here is the thing that broke me a little, right there at the table. He used my name 3 times. Daniel, in his will, wrote, "My beloved wife, Tessa," 3 separate times. The man I married used my name 3 times in a legal document, in a family that had not used it once in 10 years of dinners. The room went very still. And Vivian, who has never in her life been able to let a silence sit, said sharply, "That will is out of date. Daniel made a newer one. I have it right here." And she reached for her folder. And I said gently, "I know you do, Vivian. I have it too. You handed it to me yourself at the lunch. May I show everyone what's actually in it?" I didn't wait for her to say yes. I didn't raise my voice. I just opened my folder and I began setting the pages out on that long table, flat, one at a time, face up, the way I've done 100 times in 100 quiet conference rooms. And I let the paper be true. First, her will. "This is the will Vivian handed me at Daniel's memorial lunch," I said to the room. "The one leaving our house to her. You all watched her give it to me. It's dated the 4th. I set the next page down beside it, square and neat. "This is Daniel's medical record from the 4th, from the ICU. He was intubated. He was non-responsive. His right hand, his signing hand, had not worked since the stroke. He could not have signed anything on the 4th. I know that better than anyone in this room, because I was sitting beside that bed on the 4th, holding that hand. So either Daniel woke up off a ventilator that no one charted and signed a 4-page will no nurse noticed, or this signature is forged." Vivian's mouth opened. I went on, calm and even, setting down the next pages. "This will lists 2 witnesses, people who supposedly stood in the room and watched him sign. The second name is Pearl Hadley." I looked up the table at Vivian. "Your oldest friend in the world. The friend you stood up at this man's funeral and told all of us, crying, was stuck in Arizona at her daughter's the entire month. These are Pearl's daughter's photographs. Pearl in Arizona, dated, all month long, 2,000 miles from the room where she supposedly watched Daniel sign on the 4th. You told us where Pearl was, Vivian, at the funeral, with everyone here listening." I heard a sharp breath from down the table. Holly. Her hand went up over her mouth and stayed there. I set down the last pages, the notary record. And this stamp doesn't hold up either when you actually check it, and checking it is literally my job. It's the kind of thing that's wrong when someone copies an official form they don't really understand. I squared all the papers gently with my fingertips. 4 pages, a date he couldn't have signed on, a witness who was in another state, a notary that falls apart the moment anyone looks. This isn't a will, Vivian. It's a forgery. And forging a will is a crime. You didn't just invent a signature. You forged a day. The 4th, a day I spent holding your son's hand while a machine breathed for him. The room was silent in a way that has weight to it. Brenda was staring down at the medical record, her face gone gray. The cousins who'd pitied me were looking now at Vivian. And Vivian did the only thing people like her have left when the paper stops them cold. She didn't admit a word. She attacked. "You scheming little," she started, half out of her chair. "You were never one of us. You married him for exactly this. You've been waiting." "You're right that I married in," I said. I didn't raise my voice a single inch. "I married in 12 years ago, and for 10 of those years I kept the peace with you." I pulled the chair in from the kitchen. I held the camera at every photo, so there's not one picture in this family with me in it. I swallowed every cool little thing you ever said to me, and I called it love. Because I didn't want to make Daniel choose. It wasn't love. It was fear. Daniel was the one who loved me. I was just the one who stayed quiet so you would never have to admit you didn't want me here. I'm not quiet anymore, Vivian. And I am family. His real will says my name 3 times. Yours forged it onto a day he was dying. And then Brenda the peacekeeper, who 3 days earlier had held my hands and begged me to keep all of this inside the family, set the medical record down very slowly on the table. And she looked up the length of it at Vivian. and in a small, sick, horrified voice she said, "Vivian, what did you do?" It wasn't really a question. It was the whole family changing its mind, out loud, in 4 words. That was the moment the room turned. Not because I'd shouted. I never did. It turned because the paper was true, and now they could all see it, flat and face up in the light. The impossible date, the friend in Arizona, Daniel's real will with my name in it 3 times. There was nothing left for Vivian to be the center of. There was no performance that fit. There was only what she had actually done, sitting on a conference table, in front of every single person she had spent her life performing for. I gathered my pages back into my folder. I left her forgery lying there on the table, face up, useless. And I walked out of Carl's office, and I drove home to my house on Lark Street, with the maple tree in the back that was taller than the fence. And I sat down on my crooked porch step, the one Daniel swore every year he'd fix and never did. And I finally let myself cry. Not for Vivian. For Daniel. For the man who used my name 3 times in writing, while his mother spent 10 years pretending I didn't have one at all. Now let me tell you how it ended. Because I promised you something concrete. Daniel's real will went into probate exactly as he had written it. Properly executed, witnessed, notarized, self-proved. There was nothing left to fight about. A genuine will doesn't lose to a forgery. And Vivian's forgery did not survive 10 minutes of daylight. The house on Lark Street is mine. Free and clear. In my name, the way Daniel wanted it. The way the law agreed it should be. Nobody is moving me out of anywhere in 30 days or 300 years. The maple tree stays in my yard, where the 2 of us put it in the ground. The forged will turned into a far bigger problem for Vivian than a house she didn't get. Forging a will is a crime. Presenting a forged document as real, to take property from someone, is a serious one. I'm a witness, not a crusader. So I handed everything I'd built. The real will, the ICU records, the witness who was in Arizona, the notary that didn't hold. To the people whose job it is. And then I stepped back. An accusation isn't a conviction, and even Vivian was owed the process. But there is no good defense for a will your own dead son could not physically have signed. An investigation opened. Pearl gave a sworn statement that she had never witnessed anything, that she'd been in Arizona the whole month. The notary's record fell apart on a closer look. And faced with all of it, Vivian was never going to put a forged will, a phantom witness, and an ICU chart in front of a jury. The forged will was withdrawn. It had to be. And the probate court admitted Daniel's real one, the genuine one, with my name in it 3 times. Pearl, the friend in Arizona, when she learned her name had been forged onto a will as a witness, was furious in a way I respected. Her name, attached to a crime, without her ever knowing. She made very sure that everyone understood she'd had nothing to do with it. One more person Vivian had used as a prop, turning around to face her. And the family, the aunts, the cousins, Brenda, the whole circle that had stood in my dining room and pitied me, and decided, of course, the house went back to a marsh. They went very quiet and then very different toward me. Because they had all watched it happen on that conference table. They'd read Daniel's real will with my name in it 3 times. They'd seen the date she forged onto a day he was dying in the ICU. You cannot unsee that. The people who'd spent 10 years treating me like a guest finally understood that I had been family all along, and that the only person in that whole room who had ever truly tried to betray Daniel was the mother who buried him. Holly, Daniel's sister, came to the house a few weeks later. She stood on my crooked step and she cried, and she said she was sorry, that she believed her mother, that she'd sat at that lunch and pitied me, and she would never forgive herself for it. I told her it was all right. And it mostly was. She'd been fooled by the very same performance I'd watched for 10 years. I could hardly hate her for being slower to see it than I was. We're careful with each other now. But we're something. She is the one piece of that family I chose to keep. Vivian and I do not speak. There is nothing to say. Across the distance between a woman who forged her son's name and a woman who held his hand while he died. And a few months on, an aunt called me. Not Brenda, a different one. To ask, in a soft and managing voice, whether I might consider letting some of the legal trouble go. For the family's sake. Because Vivian had lost her son, and now all of this on top of it, and surely there had been enough pain for everyone. I said no, not cruelly, just clearly. Because by then I finally understood what this family had always really been asking of me. They never once asked me to be warm. They asked me to stay small and quiet and grateful for a borrowed chair, so that no one who behaved badly would ever have to face it. That had been the whole job from the very first dinner, where Vivian looked at the place cards and decided not to make me one. Keep the peace. Don't make it ugly. Don't act like you belong here. And it was the exact job I finally quit, alone at my kitchen table at midnight, reading a forged will under a good lamp. I told the aunt that I would always love Daniel and the good few in this family. But I would never again make myself small to keep someone comfortable who had tried to forge me out of my own home. They always told me I'd just married in. They forgot that married in means family. I still measure the maple against the fence every spring. Daniel and I planted it the first year, when the house was empty and new and entirely ours. It's well past the fence now. He'd have been so smug about that. He'd probably even have fixed the porch step by now and complained about it the entire time he did it. The house is quiet without him, but it is mine. Our names built it, and the law. And one plain folder, set flat on a table in the light, is what kept it that way. And I did one more thing the week the house became fully mine. For 10 years, I had been the one holding the camera, so that I was in none of the family's photographs. Not one. So I went and found the single picture that exists of just the two of us, Daniel and me on this porch, the summer we moved in, both of us squinting and grinning, the maple just a stick in the ground behind us. I had it framed. And I hung it in the front hall, where you can't miss it walking in. It's the first thing in this house now. And for the first time in this whole family's history, I'm in the picture. Here's the thing Vivian forgot about me. She spent 10 years deciding I was the quiet one who ought to know her place behind the camera. She mistook my silence for weakness. It was never weakness. It was a paralegal, sitting at every dinner, noticing everything, choosing, for the sake of the man we both loved, to say nothing. The day she forged his name onto a day he was dying, I stopped choosing silence. And it turned out the quiet one had been reading wills the entire time. A forged will fails on the things its maker was sure no one would ever check. There is always, somewhere, someone willing to check. If your family ever made you feel like a guest in your own life, like you were borrowing a seat you'd already earned, hear me. You were never the guest. The smallness they asked of you was never love. You're allowed to stop keeping a peace that only protected the person hurting you. If this reached something you've carried, tell me in the comments and subscribe. There's a new confession here every day, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for sitting with me to the end.